MPs have returned to Westminster with no sign of a breakthrough over Brexit. Labour has accused Theresa May of running down the clock before a vote on her deal next week. Dozens of lorry drivers have taken part in an exercise in Kent to see how they'd cope in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Haulage groups said the test was too little, too late. The NHS has published a 10-year plan for England with new money for GP surgeries, mental health services and community care. Ministers have announced new restrictions on the use of drones to try to prevent a repeat of the chaos at Gatwick Airport. Also tonight, Kevin Spacey appears in court charged with sexual assault. Pope Francis warns of the dangers of populism, and a famous night for British drama at the Golden Globes in Los Angeles. MPs have returned to Westminster and resumed their bitter battle over Brexit. In an urgent Commons question, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn accused the government of blackmail by playing for time to secure a botched departure from the EU. The Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, said Labour's approach was riddled with contradictions. MPs will debate Theresa May's Brexit deal this week and vote on it in 8 days' time. She's insisted she's still talking to European leaders, seeking assurances over the so-called Irish backstop. But the European Commission repeated that there could be no renegotiation with Britain. Outside Parliament, tempers flared, with the Conservative MP and Remain campaigner Anna Soubry being abused and jostled. Here's our assistant political editor, Norman Smith.
With just over a week to go until Mrs May's Brexit deal is voted on, there is so far no sign of any easing in the parliamentary opposition the Prime Minister faces. Hopes in Downing Street that, having listened to the views of their constituents over the Christmas recess, MPs might prove more supportive, appear to have been dashed. Instead, many MPs returning to Westminster today protested that nothing had changed. Indeed, the European Commission this morning again reiterated they would not renegotiate the existing agreement, while the DUP once more stressed their vehement opposition to an agreement which they said would cut off Northern Ireland economically and constitutionally from the rest of the UK. Number 10, meanwhile, appears to be pinning its hopes on securing further concessions from the EU over the Northern Ireland backstop. The Prime Minister today also signalled there could be more powers for Parliament to oversee the backstop.
In the coming days, what we'll set out is not just about the EU, but also about what we can do domestically. So we'll be setting out measures which will be specific to Northern Ireland. We'll be setting out proposals for a greater role for Parliament as we move into the next stage of the negotiations. And we're continuing to work on further assurances, on further undertakings from the European Union.
In the Commons, however, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn accused Mrs May, who was absent attending the launch of her NHS plan in Liverpool, of deliberately trying to run the clock down towards a no-deal outcome to intimidate MPs into backing her deal.
The Prime Minister should be here updating MPs on what progress she has achieved, if any. Instead, she's continuing her approach as before Christmas of ducking scrutiny and dodging accountability. We will hold this government to account for their incompetence.
In a further sign of the increasingly heated and acrimonious mood over Brexit, the Conservative MP Anna Soubry, a prominent Remainer, was verbally abused and jostled outside Parliament after taking part in a BBC interview. During the interview, Ms Soubry also faced repeated taunts from the protesters.
I do object to being called a Nazi, actually.
Right. Well, apologies too if you're offended by what you're listening to.
I just think this is astonishing. This is what has happened to our country.
The incident and other recent protests directed mainly at female MPs has prompted widespread condemnation, including from the Speaker, John Bercow, who tonight said he had made the police well aware of his concerns. It has, though, served to fuel the increasingly charged and febrile atmosphere at Westminster, where there now appears little appetite for compromise.
An exercise to evaluate the potential traffic congestion created by a no-deal Brexit has been staged in Kent. Fewer than 100 lorries took part in Operation Brock. The drivers converged on the disused Manston Airport near Ramsgate, used as a lorry park to prevent traffic jams, then were dispatched in convoys along A roads to Dover. Critics have questioned the value of the test, arguing that thousands of lorries use the port of Dover every day. The local Tory MP, Charlie Elphick, said the plan was too complex and likely to cause enormous confusion. From Manston, here's our transport correspondent, Tom Burridge.
In front of me is Manston Airport, a private airfield, and on the runway is a long line of lorries, queued up, ready for a no-deal Brexit drill. As you can hear, the lorries are now being dispatched in a controlled fashion to see how the roads en route to Dover during rush hour will cope.
Truck driver Tony Harnett, who voted for Brexit and took part in today's exercise, believes a no-deal scenario is still on the cards.
On March the 29th, I think it's going to be a bit of a fiasco. There won't be much getting out of the country and a lot coming in. I think the motorways will be absolute chaos.
The government was hoping 150 lorries would be involved. In the end, 89 took part. Richard Burnett from the Road Haulage Association questioned the timing and usefulness of the test.
And it's good to have a contingency and it's good to pressure test it, but today was done with far too few vehicles and it was done too close to Brexit. This should have been done a year ago.
The government's overall plan to mitigate chaos on Kent's roads is called Operation Brock. It has a budget of £35 million. Toby Howe from Kent County Council helped organise today's drill.
Do you accept though that this can't replicate a no-deal scenario?
Of course we can't replicate it because we don't know what the scenario will be, but what we need to know is just actually to make sure we've got a flow and what impacts it would have on the local network.
Are you worried about no deal?
As a resident of Kent, I'm worried, yes.
A senior civil servant at the Department for Transport has said no-deal preparations are akin to wargaming, running through worst-case scenarios and working out what can be done to mitigate the impact. The traffic around Dover flowed freely today. If it doesn't after Brexit, the impact on our economy will be significant.
The NHS in England has published its blueprint for the next 10 years, with a focus on prevention and the early detection of fatal diseases such as cancer. The strategy will see a shift away from hospitals towards GP surgeries, where patients can be treated closer to home, and it puts a new emphasis on mental health. The plan sets out how the service will spend some of the more than £20 billion earmarked for the NHS over the next 5 years. Theresa May said the strategy would secure the future of the organisation for generations to come. But critics point out that the service is already suffering a shortage of staff, which could make its long-term goals impossible to deliver. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes reports.
This is a bold, ambitious plan for the NHS in England that seeks to transform care from cradle to grave. From maternity through childhood and into old age, NHS leaders are promising better prevention, detection and treatment of disease and ill health. But Simon Stevens, the chief executive of NHS England, said this 10-year plan was also for those who, in the past, might have felt their needs were being overlooked.
It's also about addressing unmet need, particularly in services such as learning disability services and autism, mental health services, services that for too long have been squeezed from the national debate and unsupported by the NHS.
These proposals are about ensuring the NHS is able to cope with an ageing and growing population. But many of the challenges the health service faces right now are intimately connected to problems in the social care sector, for which the government has yet to produce ideas on future funding. And while many have lauded the aims of the plan, there are serious questions about whether they can be achieved given the pressures the NHS is facing, particularly when it comes to staff shortages. Helen McKenna is a senior policy advisor from the King's Fund, a think tank specialising in healthcare policy.
The NHS currently has shortages of over 100,000 staff right now, and that could rise to almost 250,000 by 2030 if current trends continue.
Some of the ideas in the plan are already being put into practice, like this exercise class in Blackburn for those suffering from osteoarthritis, that aims to give people the confidence to manage their condition on their own, helping both their physical and mental health.
I feel a lot stronger in myself, just the support and everything that goes with it, and being able to share ideas and your feelings really.
Yeah, in a couple of weeks it's done really well for me, yeah.
This announcement can't hide the fact that some tough choices on what the NHS can and can't do lie ahead. A hint of that came when Simon Stevens suggested that some targets, many of which haven't been met for months, might need to be relaxed. This is just the beginning of a long process.
Launching the plan at Alderhay Children's Hospital in Liverpool, Theresa May said the strategy was about reshaping the NHS around the changing needs of patients. But with many trusts missing all three key waiting time targets for A&E, cancer care and routine operations, their priorities are more immediate. Our health editor, Hugh Pym, has this assessment of the 10-year plan and how far its ambitions can be met by a service already under intense strain.
A long-term plan is one thing, but it won't help relieve the immediate stresses and strains felt every day by the NHS. There are 1 in 11 vacancies in the NHS in England, and questions have been raised about whether all the new pledges in the plan can be met if it's difficult now to recruit and retain staff. The 3.4% annual funding increases over 5 years allocated by the government are more than in recent years, but only back in line with the long-term average for the NHS in past decades. Attempts by NHS leaders in England to amend the target for 4-hour waits in A&E, even if logical, might prove politically difficult, with accusations that the goalposts are being moved because the existing target is being consistently missed. And yet, NHS England has stated what it wants to achieve over the next decade and can be judged against that. And the request to the government for new legislation to help bring together local health and social care organisations marks a break with the past.
A man has appeared in court charged with the murder of a passenger on a train in Surrey last week. A woman who's 27 has been charged with assisting an offender. The pair have been remanded in custody until next month. Our correspondent Angus Crawford reports from Guildford Crown Court.
Lee Pomeroy, who was 51, was stabbed 9 times while travelling on a train from Guildford to London on Friday afternoon. This morning, Darren Penseal, who's 35 and from Farnham in Surrey, appeared in court charged with murder and possessing an offensive weapon. Wearing a grey tracksuit, black glasses and with a small bandage on one hand, he crouched down in the dock with only his head visible. He said he was innocent until proven guilty and told the court he was paranoid and hearing voices. He stood briefly to confirm his name, date of birth and nationality. Later, his partner, Chelsea Mitchell, who's 27, denied one charge of assisting an offender. She's alleged to have helped him leave the scene of the killing and change his appearance. During a second hearing this afternoon, they were both remanded into custody and are due in court again early next month.
The government has announced that all but the lightest drones will have to be registered with the Civil Aviation Authority to avoid any repeat of the disruption at Gatwick Airport last month. Hundreds of flights were delayed or cancelled because of reported drone flights near the runway. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports.
All small unmanned aircraft weighing more than 250 grams will have to be registered by their owners from November. Currently, the best-selling drone is 5 times heavier than that. The new measures will formalise drone flying for many people for the first time. A significant number of owners will be required to take an online test. The government is also extending the drone exclusion zone around airports to around 5 kilometres, the same rule which applies to piloted light aircraft. This will be welcomed by the British Airline Pilots Association, which said last month that the current zone, 1 kilometre from an airport, could allow drone pilots to fly into the path of landing aircraft. Police will be given new powers to enforce the rules. They'll be able to bring down drones, seize and examine them, and issue fixed penalty fines for minor infringements. The process of testing systems capable of detecting drones is also being sped up.
Kevin Spacey has appeared in court in Massachusetts to face allegations that he sexually assaulted a teenaged waiter 3 years ago. The Oscar-winning actor had tried to avoid appearing at the hearing, which took place on the small resort island of Nantucket. Assault claims against him have also been investigated by police in London and Los Angeles. From Nantucket, our correspondent Nick Bryant reports.
This was a journey that Kevin Spacey didn't want to make, and having touched down on this jet-set island in a private plane, he made the short drive to his first appearance in court.
Did you assault that teenager? Off the sidewalks, folks.
His legal team argued he shouldn't have to appear in person because of the negative publicity that's already surrounded this case. But the actor who's spent so much of his working life in front of the cameras found it impossible today to avoid them.
We're all right. Put the court back in session.
There was even a live stream from inside the courtroom. to record the charge levelled against him.
This complaint charges that in the town of Nantucket on July 8th, 2016, did commit indecent assault and battery on person 14 or over.
During this short hearing, the Oscar-winning actor shared a joke with his lawyer but did not address the court. And for most of the time, he just peered benignly ahead of the judge. He's pleading not guilty. Nantucket is the island playground of America's elites, and in the summer of 2016, he's alleged to have sexually assaulted an 18-year-old waiter. During a late-night drinking session at a bar, he's accused of unzipping the man's trousers and groping his groin for about 3 minutes, an encounter that he claims was consensual. The waiter, who hasn't been named, actually filmed some of the encounter on his phone and sent video snippets to his girlfriend, but Kevin Spacey claims that at no stage was he asked to stop. He's already been condemned in the court of global opinion, but now a legal process is underway.
You're listening to the 6 o'clock news on BBC Radio 4. The main news so far. There's no sign of a breakthrough over Brexit at Westminster, where Labour has accused Theresa May of running down the clock to blackmail MPs into backing her deal in a vote next week. Lorry drivers have taken part in an exercise to assess possible traffic problems in Kent in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Still to come.
Did you? Look at me! Look at me!
British drama centre stage at the Golden Globe Awards. The Pope has warned that nationalist leaders are weakening the global system of diplomacy. Speaking to Vatican ambassadors, he said there was a resurgence of nationalistic tendencies at odds with the work of international organisations. He compared the situation to the years between the two world wars, when the League of Nations failed to prevent further conflict. Our religion editor, Martin Bashir, reports.
Pope Francis told diplomats from more than 150 countries that 2019 contained a number of significant anniversaries, not least the centenary of the creation of the League of Nations after the First World War. In an hour-long address, he said that attempts at multilateral diplomacy had been undermined by the rise of populist movements during the 1920s and 30s, which led directly to a second global conflict. And he warned that the same attitudes were now threatening peaceful coexistence.
It is clear, though, that relationships within the international community and the multilateral system as a whole are experiencing a period of difficulty with the resurgence of nationalistic tendencies at odds with the vocation of international organisations.
Although he did not mention specific nations, populist anti-immigrant parties made gains in Italy, France, the Netherlands, Hungary and Brazil over the last 12 months. And a partial government shutdown in the United States has been provoked by President Trump's demand for a wall at his nation's southern border. Pope Francis said people must reject the language of division, recognising that respect for the dignity of every human being was the indispensable premise for coexistence.
The leaders of Italy's populist governing coalition have given their support to the Yellow Vest protesters in France. The Deputy Prime Minister, Matteo Salvini, from the right-wing Anti-Immigrant League, said he backed honest citizens opposing a president who was governing against his people. The head of the Five-Star Movement, Luigi Di Maio, who's also a Deputy Prime Minister, urged the French protesters not to give up. President Trump has denied changing his position on withdrawing US troops from Syria. Today, he said the 2,000 Americans would leave the country at what he called a proper pace, while at the same time continuing to fight Islamic State militants. The US National Security Advisor, John Bolton, is in Turkey tonight to hold talks on the planned withdrawal. As our State Department correspondent, Barbara Platt-Usher, reports, these discussions are likely to be complex.
Last month, President Trump stunned allies and advisers alike by declaring the imminent withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria. He did so after a telephone call with Turkey's president, during which he apparently agreed to let the Turks finish the job of mopping up the remnants of the Islamic State group in Syria. Since then, his national security officials have been scrambling to prevent an abrupt departure. On a trip to Israel, John Bolton spelled out conditions for a withdrawal, that IS be thoroughly defeated and unable to regroup, and that Turkey agree to protect America's Kurdish allies, whom Ankara regards as terrorists. This will almost certainly complicate his talks in Turkey about how to coordinate the planned withdrawal. But it also reveals the split in the White House between Mr. Trump, who wants to bring troops home, and administration officials who argue that a military presence has strategic value. For now, the president seems to have been persuaded to slow things down to a prudent pace, as he's tweeted. But he also said his original intentions hadn't changed, a reminder that his instinct is to pull out.
An 18-year-old Saudi woman who spent 2 days barricaded in a hotel room in Thailand to avoid being sent back to her family has been placed in the care of the UN Refugee Agency in Bangkok. Rahaf Mohammed Al Qanoun said she wanted to seek asylum in Australia and feared she'd be killed in Saudi Arabia. Thai officials have abandoned plans to deport her immediately, as our correspondent in Bangkok, Jonathan Head, reports.
It was a day when the seesawing fortunes of an 18-year-old woman in an airport hotel room captured the world's imagination. Rahaf Mohammed Al Qanoun arrived in Bangkok at the weekend on a flight from Kuwait. She sought sanctuary in a transit hotel after her passport was confiscated. But the Thai authorities insisted they would send her back to Kuwait this morning. Immigration officials hurrying in and out of the hotel, seemingly in preparation for a forced deportation. But they hadn't reckoned with her social media skills.
I'm not leaving my room until I see UNHCR. I want asylum.
Her brand new Twitter account attracted 50,000 followers in a day and a half. Messages of support piled up, and the flight to Kuwait left without her. By the afternoon, the official line had changed. Perhaps she did have justified fears for her safety, said the immigration chief. No one should force her to go back. At her request, the UN Refugee Agency was brought in, a big concession by Thailand, which likes to keep the UN at arm's length. By the evening, she'd been given a temporary entry permit, and promises had been made to Giuseppe De Vincentis, the UNHCR's representative in Thailand.
I am confident in the reassurances provided by the Commissioner for Immigration and other Thai government officials.
You're confident she won't be suddenly sent back?
We have received assurances and guarantees that that will not happen.
What happens now is less clear. Her asylum request will be assessed, and she may eventually be resettled in a third country. Her father is on his way to Bangkok to see her, although the Thais have promised this will be her choice and not his.
Israel's security services have defended the arrest of a number of Jewish teenagers suspected of killing a Palestinian woman. The group are from a Jewish settlement in the West Bank. Their lawyers claim they've been mistreated and intimidated in custody. The woman died in October after a car she was travelling in was hit by stones and she suffered a fatal blow to the head. More details from our Jerusalem correspondent, Tom Bateman.
Jewish supporters of the teenage suspects protested against their arrest over the weekend. Those held are students at a theological school in a Jewish settlement close to the spot where the Palestinian woman Aisha Rabi was killed in October. The case has put pressure on Israel's domestic security agency. Her death came during a spate of reported cases of vandalism against Palestinians by Jewish settlers, which followed the killing of 2 Israelis by a Palestinian gunman a week earlier. Under pressure from right-wing groups supporting the teenagers, Israeli investigators released an unusually detailed statement pointing to the suspects' alleged extremism, including pictures of an Israeli flag daubed with a swastika. The agency said it would stop all forms of terror, whether Palestinian or Jewish. But human rights groups accuse Israeli authorities of dragging their feet over rising incidents of violence or vandalism by settlers against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank.
The leader of an attempted coup in the small West African nation of Gabon has been arrested and 2 of his fellow plotters killed. Earlier, a group of soldiers stormed a radio station and called for a popular uprising against President Ali Bongo, who they said was too ill to be allowed to remain in power. The president has been recuperating in Morocco since having a stroke in October. Our Africa editor, Fergal Keane, reports.
The imagery was familiar. The soldiers in combat fatigues appearing on the national broadcaster and pledging to save the nation. But it was all over within hours. The plotters were either shot or arrested. Whoever ultimately planned this coup attempt made a dismal job of it. The leader of Gabon, President Ali Bongo, was receiving medical treatment abroad when the soldiers acted. His family has ruled the oil-rich nation since 1967, amid repeated allegations of corruption and extravagant living among the ruling elite. The role of France and French business interests in supporting the Bongo family has come under strong scrutiny over the years. Whether this attempted coup will weaken President Bongo's position is unclear for the moment. But questions about a succession were already swirling due to his ill health and rumours of dissent within the ruling family.
The discount supermarket chain Aldi has had its best Christmas trading period in the UK. It recorded sales of almost £1 billion during December. Shoppers bought more than 17 million bottles of wine, champagne and Prosecco, 50 million mince pies and 100 million sprouts. In the city, the 100-share index ended the day 27 points lower at 6,811. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones is up 187 points at 23,620. On the currency markets, the pound is up 0.4 cents against the dollar at $1.27.5 cents. Against the euro, sterling is down 0.3 cents at €1.11.2 cents, making a euro worth 89.9 pence. Survivors of the Kegworth air disaster, in which a flight bound for Belfast crash-landed on the M1 in Leicestershire, are marking 30 years since the accident. 47 people died in the crash, but a remarkable number survived, many of them with serious injuries. Here's our island correspondent, Emma Vardy.
45 minutes after taking off from Heathrow, the British Midland flight carrying 126 passengers crashed into the M1 near the village of Kegworth. The front section of the plane broke away from the main fuselage and wreckage was strewn across the side of the motorway. When emergency services reached the scene, they found passengers hanging upside down from their seats, others buried under luggage. Stephen McCoy, a 16-year-old boxing champion from Toonbridge in Northern Ireland, was rescued from the wreckage. His sister, Yvonne McCoy, remembers the moment she heard about the crash.
A news flash came on the TV and says there's a British Midland plane from London to Belfast that went down on the motorway. And I knew the next day that we heard that Stephen was found very seriously ill and was given not very much chance of life.
Stephen was left with brain damage and paralysis down one side. Today, he's still working towards being able to walk again. 47 people died in the Kegworth air disaster, but 79 survived. Investigators later found that the plane had developed a problem with the left engine, but the pilots shut down the wrong engine, leading to the crash. It's still regarded as extraordinary that no one on the motorway was hurt. A raft of safety improvements were made in the airline industry as a result. Tomorrow, survivors will gather for a memorial to mark the 30th anniversary.
British stars are celebrating a triumphant night at the Golden Globes, the first major Hollywood ceremony of this year's awards season. Olivia Colman, Christian Bale, Richard Madden and Ben Whishaw are all winners in what was a particularly strong night for UK talent. The Globes are often seen as a predictor of success at next month's Oscars. Here's our entertainment correspondent, Lizo Mazimba.
The Golden Globes are decided by the approximately 100 members of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. But this year, dramas from the other side of the Atlantic have picked up many of the main awards.
Did you just look at me? Did you? Look at me! Look at me!
A Best Actress award went to Olivia Colman for her performance as Queen Anne in the comedy drama film The Favourite.
The vice presidency is mostly a symbolic job.
Christian Bale's portrayal of the former US Vice President Dick Cheney earned him a Best Actor award.
I was wondering if we could discuss using the underground entrance from now on.
I'm late for a meeting.
Bodyguard was one of 2018's most watched shows. Its star Richard Madden won Best Actor in a TV drama.
I don't pretend to know the ways of the world.
The stylish BBC spy drama Killing Eve won a Best Actress award for Sandra Oh. Another BBC show, A Very English Scandal, dramatised the Jeremy Thorpe affair of the 1970s. Ben Whishaw, who played Norman Scott, was voted Best Supporting Actor in a limited series. The timing of the Golden Globes Film Awards can often indicate which movies may be recognised at the Oscars, and voting in the Academy Awards begins today.
The headlines again. MPs have returned to Westminster with no sign of a breakthrough over Brexit. Labour has accused Theresa May of blackmail and of shambolic preparations. Dozens of lorry drivers have taken part in an exercise in Kent to evaluate the traffic congestion that might be caused by a no-deal Brexit. The NHS has published a 10-year plan for England, with money for GP surgeries, mental health services and community care. Ministers have announced new restrictions on the use of drones to try to prevent a repeat of the chaos at Gatwick Airport. Kevin Spacey has appeared in court in Massachusetts accused of sexually assaulting a waiter. BBC News.